So hello, my name is Shannon Davidson.
I'm Tom DuPont. We're with CodeSmith Tools.
And tonight we're gonna talk to you about Plinqo, which we more affectionately refer to as supercharged Linq to SQL. So before we get started, I'd like to get to know a little bit about you guys. How many of you are familiar with or have used CodeSmith? Good number.
Yeah.
How many of you are familiar with or have used CodeSmith projects? The CSP files that come with CodeSmith. A few of you? Okay, tonight we're going to assume a CodeSmith knowledge. We're not going to talk too much about CodeSmith tonight. We're going to talk more about Plinqo, but Plinqo is also managed by CodeSmith projects, so we're going to discuss that a little bit as well.
All right, so how many of you have used or are using Linq to SQL? Well, okay, pretty good. This presentation requires a little bit of knowledge about Linq to SQL because we're going to go over enhancements to the framework. But those of you who aren't familiar with it, don't worry, you're not going to be lost.
Lastly, how many of you have heard of Plinqo before? Anybody used Plinqo? One? Cool. Okay.
Okay, well, for the rest of you, our goal tonight is to make sure you've all heard of Plinqo, and we want to get you excited about Plinqo.
So let's get started. Tom, why don't you tell us, what is Plinqo?
All right, Plinqo is, first and foremost, a set of CodeSmith templates, and they're going to open up the Linq to SQL black box. They're going to give you control over your source code. So from the initial generation to regeneration to runtime, you're going to be in control of that. But of course, that's just because it's a CodeSmith template. It is designed to enhance existing functionality in Linq to SQL, as well as add new features to that framework. So, what are we saying when we say that? Okay.
What?
Next slide.
Oh. Sorry, Tom.
This is our agenda for this evening, and we're going to talk about all these points, but I don't want to delve into them right now. I just wanted to put this up here to give you the scope of what Plinqo is and what it has to offer. Our saying is that it is still Linq to SQL, but better. So, let's begin.
So Plinqo is a set of CodeSmith templates, as we mentioned a minute ago, and in those set of templates, there's a quick start. And the quick start, what we're looking to do with the quick start is make it very quick, very easy to get in and see what Plinqo is all about. So what this quick start does is it gives you a complete Visual Studio solution with a dynamic data UI, a Plinqo data project, initially pre-configured with a CodeSmith project, and also gives you an empty test project. We like to say the empty test project, we're still nothing in it, but we're looking to create unit tests for Plinqo at some point. So Tom, why don't we get out of the presentation and let's look at the quick start real quick.
Is there something you want to say about that?
Oh yeah. As a prominent member of our CodeSmith Tools team always says, let's get cracking. Okay. This is the Plinqo templates. You can find these in two different locations. They're downloaded with CodeSmith when you download the trial of CodeSmith, and they're also on our Google Code site. So if you want to keep up with the latest updates with Plinqo, you can look at codesmith.googlecode.com to find these templates. So let's double click the quick start. What the quick start does is it opens up a property dialog. All you have to do with the quick start initially is select a data source. So once you select the data source, there's several properties that we automatically set for you. And these are automatically set based on how we've seen people use Plinqo. It's the most commonly used property. Plinqo is offered in C# and VB, is available in C# and VB. You can choose to launch Visual Studio when the quick start's done. It gives you a default path to put your solution into. Also, you can copy the templates to make them part of your project Windows Explorer tree. You can choose your namespaces, choose your solution name, just some properties to get you started. So now, Tom, let's click Generate.
Nope.
Oh yeah, forgot to mention. If you've generated the quick start, I keep saying click. If you generated the quick start one time and put it into that path, the Plinqo quick start will not overwrite anything that you've already generated. So we like for you to put it into a path that is empty. So now, Tom, let's click Generate and let's see how fast we can get this going.
Now, we say you can do this in under 30 seconds. So any of you have an iPhone with a timer, or if any of you still actually wear a watch, whichever you'd prefer, let's see if we can do it in that amount of time.
So we're pointing at a pet shop database that we've pre-configured a CodeSmith data source for. And as you see very quickly, we've created a Visual Studio solution with 3 projects in it. A data dynamic UI and a Plinqo petshop.data test project. And you'll notice initially only the CSP is in there. So what we've done is configure the CSP, and we will execute the project now. So what you see is all you have to do initially is you select your data source, you click generate, now you can run it, completely compiles, opens up into a working UI. So now we see all the entities created from the PetShop database. Tom can navigate around, edit, delete, check details, anything you want to do a CRUD operation that's initially available with a dynamic data website.
Okay.
Another thing you'll notice when you first get in and start using Plinqo is that Plinqo has improved a lot of the organization of Linq to SQL. When you're using the Linq to SQL template from Visual Studio, what you get is you get an empty DBML file, you connect to the Server Explorer, select all your tables, drag them onto the DBML designer, and it creates one large designer file, one large class file. And the entities in that class file are completely separated, no base class, no base class makes it sometimes tedious, a little frustrating to create common functionality. What Plinqo does, and what you saw a second ago when we ran the project, is that it created a DBML file for you. It will continually maintain that DBML file, so you don't have to do that manually. Another thing that Plinqo offers is separation. There's not one large file. Each entity is separated into its own file. Its own class, its own partial class, 2 files. One is an actively generated file and one is a passively generated file. What I mean by actively generated is that the templates are the source at that point. Plinqo is CodeSmith templates, and as most of you are accustomed, you can edit and update your CodeSmith templates to meet the functionality that you desire. But initially we have the actively generated file. So we don't want you, as far as using CodeSmith, to touch that actively generated file. So what Plinqo will do, and we'll see here in a second, is that it will put that actively generated file behind the passively generated file. And the passively generated file is where you make your updates and your extensions to your Linq to SQL framework. So let's look at that real quick. We're going to look at the code that was generated when we executed the quick start. We see the PetShop database is now we were looking at the PetShop database, and now we've created all of the entities corresponding. And you can see that the entities were placed into their own folder, nice and neat. We have a base class down there, the Linq entity base class. You do have the opportunity to name that whatever you want. You can update your CSP to do that. A data context. You see the DBML file is already created for you and ready. So let's look at the product entity. This is what is generated when you run the quick start, or you can manually set up the templates as well. We just usually do it with the quick start to get it going quickly. You see all the attributes that are created for you. Like we had chosen to use data services. You see the data services attributes. The code is neatly organized as well. A little bit different experience than when you generate using Linq to SQL with Visual Studio.
You else want to say there? Or the CodeSmith project?
Oh, yeah. So let's take a quick look at the CodeSmith project. What a CodeSmith project is, it's an XML property set. So it's an XML file. And what it does is it maintains all of the properties that you've set for your template so that you can rerun it. This works with Visual Studio integration, and all we have to do is right-click and regenerate. So let's edit the DBML template. So the CSP manages the configuration for the entities that you're looking at. As you can see here, we have a couple of different database expressions. We have a clean expression, ignore list. It's different ways that like if you have certain tables in your database that you don't want to use, say they're prefixed a certain way, you can create a regular expression and you don't have to see the entities. You can also name the entities how you want. And there's several options here that you can use.
Okay, so we just saw some of the structural advantages of Linq to SQL, or sorry, of Plinqo over Linq to SQL. Let's talk about synchronization and data changes. When you're trying to do data changes with Linq to SQL, it can be pretty frustrating. If you make a change in the database, you have to open up your designer, delete your entities, go into your database explorer, drag the table back onto the designer. It's going to regenerate the code for you. It's not, at that point, you've deleted your entity. If you made custom changes, they're gone. They're not going to be there anymore. So, frankly, Linq to SQL is just not very refactor friendly. Plinqo, we take care of that for you. Not only do we generate the initial DBML, which we just saw, but then it's going to be maintained for you every time you regenerate from there on. What is it going to do? It's going to go out to the database, and it's going to bring back your schema. It's going to find updates or changes that you've made. If you added tables, added columns, it's going to bring them in, and it's going to merge them with your existing content. It's also going to see if you made changes, if you renamed a property, altered a data type, and it's going to persist those changes, merging all these together in a very intelligent manner. Also, in Plinqo, we have metadata classes, which I'm going to talk a lot more about in a minute. But I just want to point out that when you're dealing with the actively generated file, obviously attributes that you put back there are going to get regenerated every time because it's an actively generated file. It's getting regenerated entirely every time. But Plinqo actually uses cool new merge strategies that allow portions of the passively generated file to get updated as well. So it's going to persist changes in both your passively generated file and your actively generated file. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Right now, let's go see some of the synchronization in action. Okay, so we're going to make two changes here. First of all, we're going to come into the DBML, and note, you can still use the DBML. It's a nice editor. It's built into Visual Studio, and Plinqo doesn't disable that. You can still use it to make changes. So we're going to come in here, and the first thing we're going to do is alter your code, alter your client side. We're going to rename a property from address2 to address B. Next, we're going to make an additional change. This time, we're going to make a different type of change. We're going to go into the database, and we're going to add another column. So we're going to go into Management Studio. We're going to make that change. So we're going to add address 3.
Not 2.
Not 2. So now we've made two different types of changes. One to our code in our source, and one to the database, which is outside of our source. So now we're going to go back to the project. We're going to right-click on the CodeSmith project file, regenerate, and we're going to see what happens. It's going to tell us the file's been changed, needs to be reloaded. So when we scroll down, we're going to notice address 3.
Sorry.
When we finally scroll down, we're going to notice address 3 has been added at the bottom there. So it went to the database, it found that you made that change, and you brought it in. And address B is still preserved. Even though the column is still named address 2, the DBML knew to keep that change. So pretty cool and very easy. Very easy to make changes, very easy to bring them in, very easy to keep your custom changes persisted. Slides. So the moral of the story here, right-click and regenerate with Plinqo is pure friendly magic.
Friendly.
Very friendly.
Nice.
So let's talk more about the metadata classes. First of all, metadata was introduced into .NET with dynamic data, and we at CodeSmith saw that, and we thought it was pretty cool. What metadata classes are going to allow you to do is they're going to allow you to add attributes to one class by adding them to a different class. It's going to give you a way to dress up one class without actually altering its source. So with Plinqo, we tried to make a lot of things attribute-driven because we thought it was a really good, really easy way to abstract your configuration and the way you set up certain features in the framework. So now with the metadata classes, it makes things really, really easy. So, okay, with the metadata classes, every single Plinqo entity has its own metadata class, and that is built into or generated into your passively generated file. So you can make changes or updates in your passively generated file to your metadata class, and that's going to affect the generated side. Obviously, it's metadata. We're talking about attributes. It's attribute-driven. It's going to support you adding properties or attributes not only to your properties, but also to the classes themselves. As I mentioned earlier, we have a cool new merge strategy that is going to open up that passively generated file, and it's going to sync your metadata class with your active class. It's going to make it really easy to make sure all your changes are always in both sides. And it's even going to go so far as to synchronize your using or import statements. So you never have to worry about regenerating and then having a failed build because of some kind of naming conflict. Before we look at it, Plinqo is configured to set up a lot of attributes right out of the box. Now we saw when we opened up that actually generated file a moment ago, we saw a bunch of attributes. But even on the passive side, they're going to give you attributes by default. It's going to give you dynamic data attributes. It's going to add Plinqo rules attributes, which Plinqo has a great rules engine built in. We're going to talk about that more a little later. It's even going to add data annotation attributes, which are used by a lot of different things. So let's go take a look at a metadata class. So we opened up the passive generated file, the front file, and we have a region in here with a metadata class, and that is internal to the product class here. Now all of these properties are going to map one-to-one with properties on the actual entity class. So in this case, the product. The product's going to have a description string. It's going to have a name string. It's going to have all the same exact things. So what we want to do now is we want to make some changes. We want to regenerate. We want to see what's going to happen again. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to knock out a property. We're going to delete the name property. So now this metadata class is going to be out of sync with the entity itself, which is not good. We want these things to map one-to-one. So we're going to see how Plinqo handles that. Also, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add an attribute here. On the description string, right now the dynamic data UI is just reading that and making that a single line text field. Now, for description, that can be 255 characters. That'll support new lines, break statements. It's probably not a single line text field. It's not what you want. So we're going to make that a multi-line text field by adding an attribute to the metadata class. Now, when we run it in a moment, we should see that dynamic data is going to pick up that change and render the UI differently. Now we're going to make a third change here. We're going to delete an existing attribute to show you that the default ones don't just keep getting slapped on every time. They can be changed. They can be updated. So we're not going to make category ID required anymore. Obviously, the database still needs to be required, but we're not going to apply that in the rules. So let's right-click, regenerate again. Let's see what happens. All right, so we see here that name has reappeared, even though we deleted it. It has resynced the file. But we notice that other than that, our attributes have still been left intact. We still have the UI hint, and the required field is now gone. So if we rebuild this and then refresh that page, we should see... I want to refresh it. Description is now a multi-line text field. So our metadata classes are really cool. They're really fun to work with. And we're going to keep coming back to them the rest of the presentation because, again, a lot of things in Plinqo are set up using attributes, and we're going to put those on the metadata class.
Plinqo has two different patterns that you can use to access your data, to get your data back from the database. We have a manager pattern. If you like to encapsulate all of your data access into methods, the entire set of logic, return that to the client or business layer, then the manager pattern is what you'd want to use. You can encapsulate that into methods fully or for your business logic. What Plinqo will do out of the box is it will generate methods for primary key, indexes, foreign keys. So when you generate, like what we did a minute ago with the quick start, you'll see those if you're using the manager pattern. You'll see all of those methods generated for you. What the manager pattern also does, it takes advantage of the pre-compiled Linq to SQL queries. And this is the ability to build your queries ahead of time so that they're not built at runtime. The other pattern is the query extension pattern. If you use the query extension way of getting data from the database, you'll see that a query extension is built for each property on the entity. Like the account table we were looking at a minute ago. It has a first name and a last name property. So a query extension is built for the first name. I think in this case it's called by first name, and the last name is by last name. What this allows you to do is compose your query. So you can chain methods together, take advantage of reuse, and make an entire query, building it out of smaller parts. So let's take a look at that. And what we're going to look at now, we're going to get out of Pet Shop, and we're going to look at the tracker sample that we've built. The tracker sample is a sample that takes advantage of all the features of Plinqo. So we're going to run through a set of tests tonight and give you a real look at what Plinqo does. Okay. So what we have here is we have the first using statement or scope there uses the manager pattern, and the second one uses a query extension pattern. What you'll see is in the tracker database, we have an index for assigned ID and status ID on the task table. So when it was generated, this method, we're using the manager pattern and the query pattern in tracker. You can generate them both. It's just adding an extra template. But most of the time, we see you either use one pattern or the other. But we are using both right now. The get by assigned ID, status ID, is generated for you by default because it is an index in the database. So when we execute that method, we'll go run a query against the database and get that back. The second one is using the query extensions. You can see that this is built chaining the methods together. And while you're chaining the methods together, you're composing the query, you're building a Linq to SQL expression, and then once you ask for the list and get the list back, then it executes the query and gives you back the task for that. So let's execute that and see it in action. So we're going to stop after the manager function or manager method is executed, and we'll see that we have one task in the list. So there's one task that is assigned to Mr. Spock. When we go through, actually what we're demonstrating here is you can do the same thing in different ways. It depends on how you like to do things. The second method will return the same one task. It just got it in a different way. Okay, so that is managers and query extensions. Tom, why don't you tell us about how you feel about many-to-many relationships?
Fairly common practice, at least in databases. All right, so many-to-many associations. It is a common thing. It is not supported by Linq to SQL. Plinqo, right out of the box, supports many-to-many. It is going to add collections to your entities that have many-to-many associations, and actually entity sets to them. And this is not just a parlor trick. It's going to have that complete collection there, and it's going to maintain those associations for you. It's going to know when it needs to go to that join table and do a create, a read, an update, or a delete. So, easiest way to describe that, let's look at code again. Oh, actually, I guess we want to look at the schema, don't we? Now let's show you, we're going to go look at the database, and we're going to see what the database schema looks like so we can show you what this was generated from. So we have a user table and a role table, and then we have a join table, user role, in between them. And the user role table is very simple. It's just made up of one primary key that is a composite key composed of the two foreign keys. And so users may have many roles, just as roles may have many users. So, pretty simple. And what we're going to see here when we come back into the code is that Plinqo has generated us a collection on the user object called role list. So we're going to go into our data context, we're going to pull back a user, we're going to pull back a role, and then we're going to add that role to that user just by doing rolelist.add and passing it in. So this is going to know it needs to go to the database and create a new row in that join table. So just to show you that it's actually going to do what we're saying it is, here's our existing table. It only has 3 rows in it. So if we run this, hit a breakpoint, we're going to come in and see there should be 4 rows. And there you go, as easy as adding that to that list. Now, something I want to point out here, we make a little joke with Mighty Mouse of here Plinqo comes to save the day, the classic cartoon and everything. But this really, it's more than a joke. It's the theme of Plinqo. When Linq to SQL was released, we really liked it. We thought it was really cool. But there were certain things that were frustrating or we just really didn't feel weren't delivering entirely. So when we made Plinqo, we wanted to fix that. We wanted to make it better. We wanted to come and save the day. So, FYI. Enum generation, another thing that Plinqo will do right out of the box that Linq to SQL will not. Plinqo will automatically identify enum tables in your database using regular expressions that you can configure. It's going to generate enums for you from them. It's also going to, on regeneration, it's going to read all the rows out of the database and update those enums again. The enums that it generates, they're going to have text, they're going to have values, they're going to even have descriptions, so it's going to help you comment your code and help you make easily legible code. It's going to generate all these enums into one file behind the data context. And in my opinion, the coolest feature here is that it's going to replace association types with enum values. And we're going to see what I mean by that in just a minute. First, let's go again, look at the database, and see an enum table, and then see what Plinqo is generating from it. So we have a priority table here, and the task table actually has an association to the priority table, so every task would have a priority. And we just have 3 rows in here, high, low, and normal priority. And they all have an ID, and they have descriptions and what have you. So if we go look at Plinqo, we're going to see what was generated from that. Still debugging. So we're going to go open up the Plinqo data project. We're going to go to the code behind the data context. We're going to open up the enum file. And we didn't regenerate since we deleted that, did we?
I can regenerate.
Yeah. All right, more peer-friendly magic. All right, so it has generated an enum for us. We had a priority table. We now have a priority enum. Note the type of that enum is an integer because the primary key on the priority table was also an integer. The rows all correspond with their values in the database. We have a high with a key of 1, normal with a key of 2. All the descriptions and the comments have been added for us. So very easy. Again, it works right out of the box with regular expressions to identify those tables. So if we go back into the database and add another row, we can regenerate and see the Plinqo is going to update that enum for us. So we're going to add a new priority of very low and give it a description of my tasks. All right. So right-click regenerate. And notice this file has been updated for us. We now have a very low priority in there with a number 4. So let's go look at the code and we can show what I was referring to when I say the association types get replaced. So we come into our enum test here, and we pull back a task, and that task has a priority ID on it. That's a column that's on that table. But that is a primary key going to the priority table. So instead of assigning that a value of 1 or 2, whatever the primary key would be, rather than using a magic number, which doesn't really mean anything. What does a priority of 5 mean? Is this on a scale of 1 to 5? Is 5 the highest? Is 5 the lowest? Now we're going to actually get to use something that is more intuitive. We're going to use an enum with a description. So we can see we're going to assign it to a priority of very low, the value we just generated right now. So when we run this, we're going to see that it's going to assign, it's going to submit changes, and it's just going to work. It's great for reuse. Other programs will be able to come in and see what that means and know what 5 or 4 is going to be. And that's enum generation with Plinqo.
Many times when we're creating systems and designing, developing, using systems, developers, designers, architects are asked by the users of the system or even the managers of the system, who made this change? Who inserted this data? Who updated this data? When did it get deleted? What was it before? What is it now? Well, Plinqo gives you the opportunity to take care of that. So we want to make it easy to when they ask you the question to say, well, what happened was... Oh, wait. Sorry. I can't pull that off. I keep trying. You don't have to hear it for it. I guess not. Well, anyway, we call that auditing in Plinqo. Every time that submit changes is called on the data context, we capture what happened. Whether it's multiple entities, single entity, we tell you what happened. You can add auditing explicitly to any entity, so you have to explicitly tell Plinqo that you want to audit that entity. Implicitly, we'll audit every property when you tell Plinqo that the entity wants to be audited. However, if you want to exclude some of your properties, you can also add an attribute to the top of that property to tell Plinqo, hey, I don't want to audit this. We have a couple of system properties in our tracker database, like a created date and that changes, or modified date, that changes every time. So we don't really care. The system's making that change. So if you don't want to, or we in our case, we don't want to audit that. We just add an attribute to the top that tells Plinqo not to capture that change when we make it. Also, you get the original and you get the resulting values. So you know what happened, or you know what happened as a result of what it was before and what it is now. Also, you can tell who did it and when. And again, as we mentioned before, with the metadata classes, it's attribute driven. They are generated. And let's look at that now. Let's first take a look at the class.
Okay.
We're going to look at the user table or user entity for a second. The metadata class, the class that Tom was talking about a second ago. You see the attribute there at the top, CodeSmith.data.audit.audit. That tells Plinqo that you want to audit that entity. You want to capture changes when changes are made on that entity. So we'll look down into the properties, and you can tell the created date and modified date that I mentioned a few seconds ago, we didn't want to audit that. So all you have to do to tell Plinqo not to audit that is to add that attribute to the top. So the not audited attribute tells Plinqo we do not want to audit created date or modified date. So let's go back and look at the code for a second. So we're going to make two updates here. Well, one update, one insert. We're going to update the user. We're going to add the insert. I'm sorry, we're going to insert the task. So let's run that. When submit changes is executed, an object off of the data context called last audit is populated. And once it completes, as it has, we're going to examine the audit object. So let's look at the audit object. Pull it up, Tom. Let's go.
Working on it.
Come on. Last audit. Okay, so we see the date that the change was made, 7/9/2009, 7/16. It was made by Shannon.
He done it.
Okay, even though Tom did it. Anyway, we can also see that two actions took place. And we know what types of actions. We know an insert took place and an update. We know that let's look at the update first. So what Plinqo will do is it'll only capture the properties that were changed. As you can see in this update, one property changed. The comment changed. We can see which key that it changed on. And if you'll open up the comment there, you can see what the original value was. In this case, it was null. And you can also see what the resulting value was. I think if you pull the name over a little bit, you can see
there we
that.
go.
There you go.
Hiding on us.
So original there is null. And then what the resulting value is, which is current. I love my mom, but I hate Winona Ryder. Okay. That was Tom's idea. And the other thing that we can do is you can hit F5. Audit is an XML serializable object. You can store the XML from this object, as we'll show you in a little bit with our tracker application, and do many things with the nice XML serialized audit object. You can see by looking at it, you have all the same information that we were looking at in the last audit object.
That's easier to read.
There we go.
Anyway.
Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
Now let's look at Plinqo rules. Plinqo rules are also executed when submit changes are called on the data context. We have several different, Plinqo has several different rules that are generated when you generate Plinqo using the quick start or regenerating each time. We have assign rules. We have rules that are generated from, let's say you have a required field in the database. So when you have a required field in the database and you execute submit changes, you don't want to have to go all the way to the database to figure out that that's not nullable. So the required attribute that you saw a few minutes ago in the metadata class is generated for you. And when that submit changes is called, the rule for that required attribute there tells Plinqo that I need to execute the required rule for this property. Those rules are automatically generated. You can also create custom rules. Any class that you create for Plinqo that is a custom rule needs to implement iRule.
No, he doesn't. It was that guy back there. He's really rowdy.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so we have a couple of programmatic rules that we're going to show you as well. And we also have something called assign rules. I showed you the created date and the modified date a minute ago. That's an assign rule. It doesn't actually validate anything, but we want to assign a current date for both of those when we execute submit changes. So let's look at that now. Okay, we're going to insert a user here. We're going to only set the email address property. User requires a few more properties to be set. Also, we've set up a rule, a custom programmatic rule for the user. So let's look at that for a second. In the metadata class, as you're probably starting to see a theme, you can do a lot with this metadata class and a lot with attributes. And as you can see, they're very easy to read. You can easily see what has been set up for that property. In this case, we have a couple of required properties, first name, last name. I think the passwords are required. And we also have the assign rules I mentioned a minute ago for created date and modified date. That is the now assign rule. And on created date, we set it to entitystate.new. That means that we only want that rule to run when the object has not been inserted into the database. Entitystate.dirty, obviously, I think, when the object has been updated. Every time the object has been updated and we're wanting to submit changes again, then we want to update that value and set it to the current time. You see the required attributes that were generated by Plinqo. The now attribute was generated by Plinqo. If you'll move up a little bit, also on every entity, there's an add shared rules partial method. This is executed every time submit changes is executed as well. What we've done here is we've added a custom programmatic rule with the user exists rule class. If you'll go to that, please. You'll see that implements iRule. That implementation means you set a priority, you set the error message, and you also had the method that you actually execute the logic for the rule. In this case, we have priority 1. We set the error message. Username already exists. The logic for this rule is we go check to see if a username already exists, and then we tell Plinqo whether it was successful or not. Oh yeah, you can also see that we have a target property that's set down there as well. So when you're examining the rules, you can see what property the class was intending on looking at. So let's look back at the test. Let's run the test. So once submit changes was executed, Plinqo goes and looks at all the rules. If any of the rules do not pass, it does not let the submit changes complete successfully. Nothing was saved to the database. We get a count of how many rules were broken, in this case 5. And we also get a nice little list of all of those rules. So let's look at the rules. Let's see what we get there. Let's open up the first rule. Username already exists, so we kind of know already, especially if we were the developer of the system, what already is broken. So let's look inside the rule. You can see there that it's the user exists rule that was broken. Look inside. And inside that rule, you can see all the information for the rule. If we look down through the rest of the rules, you can easily see what was broken and what possibly could be done to fix the rule. Lastly, when you execute go ahead and execute this. There's a nice toString that's built for you on the broken rules collection that you can see a nice concise list of what was broken and what the error messages are for each of those rules. So Tom, why don't you tell us how you feel about commitment?
A little afraid, actually, which is why at first Linq to SQL kind of scared me. It has no detach method. It's very clingy. Plinqo, on the other hand, has no anxiety about separation. Every entity in Plinqo implements a detach method. An entity detach is great for when you're dealing with asynchronous code, data caching, or just complex logic where you have to pass an object around. Maybe it's going to involve multiple data contexts. It's a feature that is absent in Linq to SQL, and that you don't realize how much you need it until you need it, and then it just becomes vital. So we have added entity detach in Plinqo. Let's take a look at some more code.
Yes, sir.
Some people like TDD, test-driven development. We like test-driven demos. So that's why we keep going back to the tests. All right, so what we're going to do here is we have two using statements. And in the first one, we create a data context, we get a task back, and then we detach it from the data context and leave the using statement. So that context is being disposed of. Outside of the using statement here, outside of data context, when this entity is not attached to any context, we're going to make a detached change, or an offline change.
Disconnect.
Pardon?
No, go ahead.
We're going to make a offline change. So then we're going to go into the next using statement, create a new data context, reattach it to that context. Note that we're going to flag it as being dirty. That's what that true is there for. And then we're going to submit changes. And that's going to be allowed to reattach to the context. This is something that in Linq to SQL, you would go to reattach, and it would throw an exception. It would say, I'm sorry, this entity is already attached to another context. So let's go ahead and run it, and we can just see that it will succeed. And notice it succeeded, no exception was thrown there. It attached that entity, it resubmitted into the database. So we got one more change, and this is just to show that we can make changes even after the attaches occurred against. Once you have detached the entity, you can then reattach it to another context, and then it's being tracked. The changes are being tracked just like anything else. You can make more changes, make updates again. It's still going to work. And again, we'll run this just to show that it will complete without error. And change gets submitted successfully. So, more features that Plinqo offers over standard Linq to SQL, WCF and data services. Linq to SQL support for these are rather poor. Deferred loading and serialization issues plague you when you're dealing with WCF and Linq to SQL. And there is no support from Linq to SQL Designer for data services. It doesn't implement certain interfaces that need to be there in order to get used. Plinqo, on the other hand, we take care of this for you. Plinqo is going to add data service attributes. It's going to implement interfaces needed for data services. It is, even in the quick start, is going to go so far as to set up data services for you right out of the box, which this was an option that was in the quick start, and when we generated the pet shop, we had that set to true. So we're going to go back now and look at the pet shop and show you that data services are running right now on that project, and it didn't take any configuration on our part to do. So we're getting back collections. Shannon is browsing through the data service results here. And again, that's working right out of the box, right out of the quick start. Something that would take a little bit of effort to get running with standard Linq to SQL. Also, for WCF, Plinqo is going to go ahead and is going to implement some features that are going to make that a lot easier to use. We're going to make improved serialization, and we're going to implement cloning for all the entities. So, more on that? Shannon?
Standard Linq to SQL cloning support is not there. Plinqo, as you may have guessed, supports cloning. All entities in Plinqo implement iClonable. Implementing iClonable means that every entity in Plinqo has a clone method. So this clone method takes advantage of WCF and the data contract serializer to create a complete memory copy of the object. The new object is disconnected from the data context, does not touch the original object, so the original object is left alone, and the new object is independent and ready to be used. So let's take a quick look at that.
No one laughed at the clone trooper? I mean, come on, it's kind of funny.
Another one of Tom's ideas. Okay, so we see the clone. All you have to do when you generate using Plinqo to clone an object is call the clone method. No setup, no configuration, no code to be written, call clone. You have a new object, completely independent. As you can see here in the test, we changed the ID to 0. It's not connected to a data context, so we have to insert on submit, then we submit changes. Clone, and make clone very easy. Secondly, serialization is along the same lines. Serialization with standard Linq to SQL is rather frustrating. When we were first using Linq to SQL, we got circular reference issues, or circular reference errors all the time. Well, so what we did, again, was take advantage of WCF serialization, the data contract serializer, and we put a 2XML method on all the entities. So all you have to do now is, like what we saw with the clone, I guess, is on each entity you execute the 2XML, you're creating an XML serialized version of that object. Working with JSON becomes very easy at this point, because all you have to do is grab the data from the database, detach from the data context, serialize the object, send it back down. So let's look at that. This will be a very similar looking test to the one we just looked at. We grab a task from the database, we execute the 2XML method, then we write it out to the console. So execute that. Let's take a look at what it serializes. You can pull that up, and there you go. So we call 2XML, we've serialized the object. It's nice, clean, neat, serialized object. So Tom, I have one more.
You do.
Query result cache. This is a new thing that we've just added.
I think we have a question.
You do? Sorry.
I actually do have a question.
Yes, sir.
So you clearly put in data contract, data member, other things to support WCF here, right? On your objects, but they seem to be being dumped into the same project as my DBML, right? Which means since my data contracts, if I wanted to share data contracts but not my direct database connection to another thing, I'm gonna have to go rip this apart now, or how could I do that? Because very often I'll take my data contracts and put them into a binary that inside my organization I can share that across different projects.
I actually haven't done that, but I'm guessing you could use the metadata class to do some of that.
Okay.
But we have not had that question before. I would have to take that offline with you. But thank you for the question. Okay, so we're going to talk about caching for a minute. The vital aspect to any framework is the option to cache data. If you are constantly going to the database to receive the same results over and over again, this is probably costing you time and money. Actually, I would think that it is costing you time and money. Definitely if your results take time to get. What the query result cache in Linq to SQL does, it gives you the option to cache any Linq to SQL query. It supports anonymous type projections. Obviously, queries on your entities, they're all type safe. They're all stored in cache, disconnected. It uses the system.web.caching.cache class, which is not necessarily specific to ASP.NET. You can use the system.web.caching.cache class outside of ASP.NET and your class libraries and WinForm apps. And what Plinqo also do is make the creation of the cache keys transparent. You don't have to worry about creating the keys, maintaining the keys. You just call from cache, and the Plinqo framework takes care of that for you. Along with the cache key management, you get sliding and absolute expiration. This is given to you by the cache class as well. The fun thing about the from cache query extension is that it works within the query extensions that you're used to using composing the Linq to SQL queries. So you create a query, all you do is add from cache on the end of it. It's a query extension, so you can put that into your chain as you're creating your queries. By default, when you call the from cache query extension, it's cached for 1 minute. However, you can configure that. You can add an absolute expiration, you can set a priority on it, or you can add a sliding expiration. So we'll look at another test. We'll look at the query cache, and let's pull open Profiler. Clear.
Yeah, we have to run it.
Oh, yeah. We'll clear it in a minute, I guess. So run it up to the... The first time this query is executed, we'll see by looking at Profiler that we are hitting the database. We're bringing back the results from the database. This is stored for the default 1 minute. Execute, please.
Yep.
Thank you. Let's go look at Profiler. Okay, we see that it executed, it hit the database, executed the query, returned back the results. It's stored for a default time of 1 minute. So the second time that we execute this method, we'll go back to Profiler, and we should still, and we do, we still see one item in Profiler, one row. So it did not hit the database the second time. It pulled back the same, go back. It pulled back the same set of tasks for both of those calls. So secondly, we're just going to have a quick example of setting an absolute expiration. If you want an absolute expiration of 5 minutes for this query, then it's easy to add that 300 seconds on there. This one's going to be cached for 5 minutes. So we'll see the same thing. We'll run through that, look at Profiler. You see one row adds Profiler because we hit the database. The second time that we run it, nothing hits the database. So it's easy to cache. You see all we did was add the from cache query extension there. So now that we're done with that, Tom, why don't you tell us how you feel about performance enhancement?
Where was the recruiter sitting? Okay, so I hope you've been enjoying all the features I've been showing so far. I hope they're getting you excited. This is the last slide we have about additional features, but I personally think we've saved the best for last. One of the first questions people always ask us, do you have any statistics? Can you show us any way that Plinqo is going to be faster or better over Linq to SQL or any other framework? And we always point people at this particular information because if you use these features, you are going to increase performance for your application. So let's get started. Batch updates and deletes. These are going to be done with user-friendly Linq query format. This is going to allow you to build an actual update statement or a delete statement, whereas a standard Linq query is just building a select. This means that you're not going to have to load objects into memory, and you're not going to have to wait for submit changes to the data context. This is going to run on the spot, go out, do your job once, and come back one round trip instead of two. To do any kind of update or delete with Linq to SQL, you have to go to the database, you have to query what your result set you want, make your changes, and send it back. 2 trips. To delete an entity, the same thing. You want to delete one entity, you have to go to the database, get it back, send it back in for delete. Not very efficient. Batch updates and deletes are going to help with that. So let's take a look at that code. So what we're going to see here is we're going to do the same thing twice, but we're going to do it with different format each time, just to show you that, again, this is very flexible. It's how you want to code. The first one is going to be done with a lambda expression, and beneath that, it's going to be done with a Linq expression, or a Linq context expression. So what we're going to do here is the first line is the select statement. We're going to say where all tasks are equal to, or have a status ID equal to status not started, and we're going to update those with a status ID of not, or status done. Then we're going to do the same thing, but backwards. We're going to select all the tasks that are status done and turn them back into status not started. So 2 updates. It's going to go out and come back 1 time for each. And this could affect as many rows as the select matches. So you don't have to pull back 20 rows to make 20 updates. You just send this one hit. It's going to go to your database and back. And I believe we're going to see that with Profiler. Let's run them both.
Oh, sure.
So we made 2 update requests. Notice we have 2 update statements in Profiler. Went out, came back with your result. Very easy. So now we're going to go look at deletes. And this is going to work very similar. But actually, one additional feature we've added with delete is we've added a query extension to just delete by an ID. So rather than have to do the syntax, you just say, oh, I want to delete this row. So we have delete James ID up there. And then beneath that, again, we're doing the same thing here. We're going to do a lambda expression followed by a Linq context. And we're going to delete, well, it's a pretty complicated query. We're going to delete where approved is false, last name is McCoy, and address ends in StarTrek.com. And then with the one beneath that, we're going to do a different query. We're going to do where approved is false, and just last name is McCoy. But anyway, we're going to generate delete statements. It's going to go to the database, do its job, come back, 1 trip. So let's go back into this Profiler. And I guess we're going to see this 3 times. Three delete statements. Very simple, very easy to use. All right, let's go back to those slides. So, store procedures. Now, Linq to SQL does support store procedures, but does not support, with the designer, getting back multiple result sets. So you're going to have to do one type of select statement, bring back one set, which, if you're using store procedures, that might not be what you want to do. You could generate a query with Linq, and one of the ideas of store procedures is to bring back lots of data. Well, Plinqo enables the ability to have store procedures with multiple result sets. It's going to go to your database, find your store procedures automatically. It's going to generate them as extensions off your data context. And then it's going to let you bring back an multiple result set object that you can pull all your data from. So let's go take a look at that code. All right, so what we see here, if Shannon could highlight that code for us, a little bit easier to see. This is our store procedure in the database. We're creating a store procedure called getUsersWithRoles, and off of our data context, we have a method called getUsersWithRoles. It's going to do two select statements. It's going to bring back select star from user, select star from user role. Two complete things. So all we have to do is do a context.getUserRoles, put that into again, it's going to give back an multiple result set object, so we're going to assign that to results, and then we're going to pull out the data from that result set one at a time, and we can cast that to whatever type of object we feel is appropriate. So in this case, casting them obviously to users and user roles. We're going to get back those sets with the store procedure. Want to run that?
Yes, sir.
So notice we got back 9 users and 3 user roles. One store procedure, multiple result sets coming back. Plinqo supports that. So.
Sorry. I like to click.
He just likes to navigate around in Windows 7. Thinks it's very pretty.
Just to prove that I can.
And so we come to maybe the best one, batch queries. Now, what if you don't like store procedures? What if you want to be able to write multiple select statements and get them back at once? What if you just like writing in C#? I know I do. Well, we're going to be able to support that with batch queries. Any data context query can be batched up and brought back in one trip from the database. And this is really awesome. In Linq to SQL, every time you want to get a different entity, you have to build your query, get back one result. Build your query, get back one result. And so it can be inefficient when you need to get back a bunch of data at one time. This is going to allow you to batch them up and use them. And something that's really cool about this is that this doesn't stop any other logic that would take place with a query being executed. If you have your data context load options set to do load with, everything you bring back in that query is still going to follow the rules of that context. It's going to batch all your queries up, go get them, and bring them back the way you wanted them to come back. Obviously, this can be a major performance optimization. So let's go look at that code. So what we're going to do here is we're going to simulate our store procedure. We're going to write 2 queries. We're going to select all from our users and select all from our user roles. We're going to put them, we made them both query objects. They haven't been executed yet. We're going to use the execute query method off our data context, which takes in a param of queries. We're going to pass them in as params. We're going to get back, again, an multiple result set, the same thing we got back from the store procedure. And then we're going to pull our data out. So if we want to run this, we should get the same results as we just got with the store procedure, only this is all C# code. And it's happening right there in one call to the database. Also, these are all being tracked, too, by the data context. I should point that out as well. So you can bring these all back and you can still make updates. So we notice we have, again, 9 users, and it should be 3 roles. Yeah, 3. So that is extremely useful with Linq to SQL. A way to bring back multiple sets with one call. Great optimization.
Okay.
And Shannon, that's what I think of performance enhancement.
Thank you for enlightening us.
All right.
Okay, what we're going to do now is we've been going through a set of tests for this tracker application. We have a UI that we built as well. It's a small MVC UI that kind of gives you a visual look at what you can do with Plinqo. So Tom, if you'll set the MVC as a startup project and run.
I believe it is.
This interface takes advantage of all the Plinqo features as well. So log in, please. This is using the same features that we just went through with the test project. Let's go look at the users. So we'll go in and edit one.
Anyone in specific?
Eric. Okay, so you see that we have roles and comments. Let's add a comment. We're also auditing this table. Thank you, Tom.
Should save that.
Yes. Okay, we'll save that. We're auditing the user table. So now let's go down and look. We have the audits at... Oh, wow. Nice avatar. Dang.
Eric, I just want to tell you what had happened was Shannon added that. I like auditing.
Run over by the bus, obviously. As you can see, we're storing the XML file. We're running an XSLT on the XML file, and we can show a pretty little... You can do that in any way that you want. You can store the audit in the database if you want, show it that way. What we chose to do is an XSLT to make the audit look kind of nice. And having Eric's avatar above it. Everybody know Eric? Eric's the creator of CodeSmith. I don't know if you guys know that. So we like to make fun of him a little bit. Huh? That's the cool version of that guy.
That's the old word again.
Exactly. So let's go back up. The roles are the user role table that we looked at a second ago with the many-to-many relationship. And we can see Eric has the appropriate role assigned. And so we'll assign another role because Eric takes on 2 roles. So assign the appropriate role, Tom.
Appropriate, yes, sir.
Thank you. So now we know that we have 2 roles assigned. Let's look at the code for that a second. We've already shown you a quick test, but we'll show it again.
Guess I shouldn't have closed that.
Going to the user controller, and we have the add role here. And you'll see the add role is taking advantage of the many-to-many list. It's adding the role, and then the role shows up in the UI when we re-render the user page. So let's go to the task page. Okay, so let's have Tom add a task. Another thing that we have in Plinqo, in the tracker sample is we're executing rules. We have a couple of rules. Obviously, you have to set all of the required fields. It's checking for that. So keep going, Tom. Nice. I enjoy watching you type. Keep going.
Do you have to fill in the dates on this thing?
Yes, you do. They're required.
What's the date today?
Today is the 9th, 2009. We'll make the due date June 1st. I'm kidding. Hit create. Oh, wait. Tom's a noob as well. So Tom can't add tasks because our custom rule in the tracker application does not allow noobs to add tasks. So I guess I'll have to do it because I am not a noob. So let me log in.
Sir.
And we'll see when I log in. We'll look at my roles. I'm a manager. Managers add tasks, as we all know.
Micro manager.
Assign Tom is normal priority. Tom's normal status.
This is all based on a true story, by the way.
Plinqo will execute the same rules here. And you can see I can add a task. Another sample here is we have the copy task. I can copy this task. I created a new task. It saved it for me as well. I'm going to assign this to Eric. Let's see. Normal task. Easy for Eric. You guys don't know what FIFA is. It's Xbox Soccer. Eric loses to me at that all the time. Let's go back to the list. We have a couple of tasks in here. So I can select all of the tasks. I can update them.
Did you assign yourself to get you lunch?
You are correct, Tom.
Wow.
Thank you for noticing that.
Think we can edit it? Maybe add, you can bring me something back too? Change? No? Maybe?
Okay. So we see the same audit log created for the task here as well. It takes advantage of the audit. So what we did here is we have a clone. Let's go ahead and look at that for a second. Usual create. There's the broken list, or broken rules list. So you saw that we added the rules to the top. We're using the broken rules list to get the error messages out and display those at the top of the page. Also, the copy task, all we're doing is cloning the object, creating a new one, and inserting it. The list of tasks is taking advantage of the update functionality that we mentioned a minute ago, where you can update multiple tasks at the same time. So I'm going to change the status to all of these to done. And you see they're all changed. In the task controller, update status runs one update statement, creates a query expression based on the checkboxes that we checked, and updates all of these tasks to the status that I set. This application is also available on our Google Code site. You can download this application and look at it, examine it, even update it, play with it how you want, and see what you can do with Plinqo. It gives you a nice, quick, concise example of how to use Plinqo.
So does that help really tie everything together? I mean, we go over a lot of features back to back, but really when you see them in an application like this, does it really help kind of show, oh man, I can use this and I can use this? And is it helpful to see that? Yes? All right.
We've just finished creating a pet shop sample application as well. And you can also go onto the same CodeSmith Google Code site. You can see the pet shop sample. We created the pet shop sample with dynamic data tonight. That one you can do yourself, just pointing at a pet shop database and creating that. The pet shop sample is the standard pet shop sample as created by Vertigo software, and we've updated that a bit to use Plinqo. So you can also examine the pet shop application and look at Plinqo there as well. I'm not going to go into the pet shop sample too much since we've covered most of the tracker application. But you can see as well, we have a data project here. We can regenerate the pet shop application using the CodeSmith project. We can add custom functionality. And then we're using Plinqo all throughout, obviously, the pet shop application.
So all these applications and Plinqo, and the source for Plinqo, by the way, all of this is available, again, on our Google Code site or on, we have Plinqo.com. You can get access to all of this. These slides are available, all of this stuff. So please, if this interests you, check that out and feel free to look at it, play with it, see what you think, and then give us feedback. We have our forums on our community.codesmith site. We have, if you happen to find an issue, we have issue trackers with Google Code. We want to know what you think of feedback. We want to get your feedback on Plinqo.
And that's all we have for tonight.
Is that it? Thank you very much.